All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brandon Butler. I am the administrative coordinator for the CARES Act Assistance Program in Denver. This workshop is sponsored by the Denver MBDA and the Denver MBDA CARES Act Center. Today, we have a very special guest to share with you, Larry Whiteside Jr. Larry is a veteran CISO, former USAF officer, and thought leader in the cybersecurity field. He has 25 plus years experience in building and running cybersecurity programs, holding C-level security executive roles in multiple industries, including the DoD, federal government, financial services, healthcare, and critical infrastructure. Larry currently serves as the Chief Technology Officer and Chief Security Officer at CyberClan, which is a full-service global incident response and managed security services provider for small to medium-sized businesses. Larry is also the co-founder, president, and on the board of directors at the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals, which is a 501c3 nonprofit association that is dedicated to increase the number of minorities and women in the cybersecurity career field through providing workforce development that includes skills assessment, training, education, mentorship, and opportunity. Please help me welcome Larry Whiteside Jr.
Thanks for joining. As you can see, I've got a million things going on all the time, but I'm happy to be here. I'm glad that you guys are here to listen, and I'm just going to share some things, right? And I'm going to talk quite a bit. If you've got questions, please put them in the chat. And I just appreciate your time. So we're going to try this again. We had success during the last presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. So let's see, we're going to go to this and share screen. Desktop 2. Share. And all right, so please tell me everybody's seeing the full screen, yes?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. As I said the last time, sometimes when we got multiple windows, I've got 4 windows, and sometimes you can get the wrong window showing and so forth. So again, appreciate everybody coming. So let's get this started. So first, Brandon went through a little bit of this, and for me, the reason I show this slide is because I've been doing this a long time, and ultimately this is my passion. I think God purpose built me to be in the field that I'm in because I love it, and I know that not everybody gets to say that they get to do what they love every day. So I'm happy about that. But the thing that drives me most every day related to this industry is, having been in it now 29 years, is the organization that I co-founded, ICMCP. So we are geared at driving and increasing diversity in this field of cybersecurity. So we do a lot. I do a lot of speaking on diversity. I'm on a number of DEI councils, and we give away scholarship money and training and a number of other things to try and get underserved communities and women into the field of cybersecurity to make it more representative of the people that make up this country. Additionally, this field pays well, and it's an opportunity for underserved communities to be able to have a socioeconomic change to their lifestyle and potentially generations. I can personally say that the life that I grew up with and lived, that my children will never experience that. And so I feel blessed. But that the industry is my passion, but the thing that drives me every day is that organization. So let's talk. So the one thing I'll say is this, and I start here when I talk to small businesses because it's important for small businesses to understand. You are at just as much risk as JP Morgan Chases, the Amazons, and everyone else. And I say that because a lot of times small businesses think, well, right, why me, right? They aren't going to come after me. And the reality is that attackers don't discriminate. They don't care if you're small. They don't care if you're big. All they care is, do you have money that you can potentially pay them based on what they're doing? And so with that, the reason for that is because they realize, from a small business standpoint, A, you're easier targets, B, you're more likely to pay. So if you think about this scenario, an attacker goes after JP Morgan Chase, typically takes them 9 to 12 months before they can actually exploit anything related to any of the organization systems. Then when they finally get in, they're going to ask for a certain amount of money. So whether it's a ransomware attack or whatever type of breach, stolen data, they're going to ask for a certain amount of money or try and monetize the data that they steal. The likelihood that a JP Morgan Chase is going to A, pay a ransomware is small, but B, the number of controls and everything else that a JP Morgan Chase or any other super large entity is going to have in place compared to a small business is going to be massively different. So if you think about 9 to 12 months worth of work versus a few days worth of work, and being able to multiply the few days worth of work over and over again, because the likelihood that a small business is going to actually make a payment versus the JP Morgan Chase is much, much higher, because for a small business, you getting hit with a ransomware from a phishing email, it can potentially take you out of business. So the likelihood that you would pay $5,000 ransomware versus JP Morgan paying a $500,000 ransomware is far more likely. So if they do 100 $5,000 opportunities, guess what? They just made the same amount of money with far less effort and far less strife. So as a small business, you do have threats out there. You are a target. So we'll talk about a few ways to stay secure, and we'll go through some tips and tricks, right? So one is email phishing, right? So many of you have probably gotten, the phone call, whether it's from the IRS saying that there's a warrant being put out for your arrest, or whether it's the company calling to say that they want to offer you a better rate on your credit card, right? Every one of us has probably gotten at least one of those phone calls at least once. I get them multiple times a week, right? Now, for me, I tend to try and keep them on the phone to go through it, because the longer I keep them on the phone, jockeying with them back and forth, that means there's somebody else that they may not be able to do it to. But with that, the goal is to get some form of information from you, right? If they're calling about your credit card and giving you a better rate on your credit card, they want to take your credit card information, right? They want to be able to compromise your credit card, go spend a lot of money, because they know if you give them your Capital One credit card and they go spend $10,000, the reality is, or whatever your credit limit is, the reality is Capital One is going to refund that money to you, right? But if you get a phishing email, right, and you get a phishing email and you give your credentials away, or you click on a link in that phishing email, what happens there is now that potentially impacts your business directly. So let's look at this phishing email. And this is just some little things that you can do in your organization, right, to help identify. So first off, recognize that Amazon, Microsoft, Google are never going to send you things asking you for passwords and asking you to enter your credentials inadvertently, right? So you've probably gotten the email that says, hey, we think someone just logged into your account from somewhere else. Click this link to verify, right? They're not going to ask you to click a link. What they will do is, if you did have someone log into your account from somewhere that they did not expect or they haven't seen before, they will ask you to call, or they'll tell you you should go change your password, but they're not going to have you click a link. But let's dig into this little example here. If you look at the from, right, in the email address where it's coming from, right, there is no such thing as an AmazonCanada.ca. Doesn't exist, right? So that's an easy marker that sometimes we might look over. But let's take it a step further. Say the from does look like it's actually from Amazon, if you want to take this a step further. Well, the other piece is, if it happened to you, they know who you are. So they're not going to just have a generic name, client, customer. They're not going to have a very generic name. It's going to be specific to you. The other piece, and this piece is probably the most important piece, because this is where they are tricking users. is the link that they send you to. So if you look at what the words say on the link, the words tell you you're going to go to the Amazon sign-in. But if you don't know, you can actually hover over a link with your mouse in an email, and it'll actually show you the actual URL that it's taking you to. And if you look at this URL, those two things look very, very different. So it's obviously going to take you somewhere else. But what happens is, if you don't look at it and you don't pay that little detail attention to it, then what will happen is you'll click on the link. And I guarantee that the link you go to, when you get to that page, it'll look a lot like an Amazon page. But again, once you get to that link, if you then look in the browser and see the actual page that you're at, right, you can even click on the certificate. So if for those who utilize the web quite a bit, you know there's a little lock next to the URL. If you go to that little lock in the URL and you look at it, it'll tell you whether it's actually that site or not. It'll tell you who signed that and who that certificate belongs to. And every time, without question, I guarantee that it never belongs to the name of the company that you thought you were going to. Whaling is another trick, right? So let's say your cousin, say, you know, that your CFO is on vacation, right? Somebody of importance to you is out. And so you get an email where it's portraying that they are this person that is important to you. Now, a lot of times people have asked me, well, how would they know that that person is important to you? How would they know that this person is somebody? Well, a lot of times the reason that they know is because there's this swath of data out there called OSINT. It's open source intelligence. And what open source intelligence is, it's just a gathering of public information that's available about you as an individual, right? So I'll give you an example. In the state of Florida where I live, voting information is public. So if you're a registered voter, your name, your address, and your party are all public information that I can find. That's just one example of data. If you're on LinkedIn, all that data that you have out there is public. If you're on Facebook, right? If you aren't locked down to your friends, and if you have yourself, you can go out there and there's a lot of data there that's public. There's so many different areas that we put personal data out there that people can gather this stuff together and begin to find and create things about you to identify, right? Who's in your life, who's your brother, who's your sister, who are your children, who's your spouse, all of those different types of things. What's the name of the company you run? Who works in that company? All of these things are information and that can be gathered about a person. And so that's how they create these things. They begin to try and target you. Additionally, and we'll get into some of this other stuff later, is there's a lot of databases out there on the dark web that has a lot of our information in it. The next is passwords. So passwords are the bane of our existence. I don't think I know anybody who loves passwords, but the reality is passwords are here and they're going to be here for a minute. And they've been here for a while. So it's important to understand what's important as it relates to creating passwords today. So if you recall, for those of us, I don't see anybody's camera on, so I can't tell what the age group is that I'm dealing with here. But, you know, when passwords became a thing in the mid to late 90s, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 was pretty common. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 was pretty common, right? Password was pretty common, right? Basic passwords were a thing. Well, we then moved, and if you're of a certain age, you remember when we moved from that to complex passwords, where you had to have uppercase and a lowercase and a special character and a number, and you couldn't have a name, and you couldn't, right? Right. So where we're going now is passphrases, because what's happened is with the onset of computing and the multi-processors moving so fast, and how fast speed has gotten in computers, the ability to hack a password that you created in the 90s is literally seconds. Honestly, any password that's less than 8 characters long even if it has a capitalization in it, can be cracked in seconds. But now, even when we went to complex passwords are able to be cracked now in a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. So now we've realized that what's most important is length. And I say length because this is where the term passphrase comes from, right? Excuse me, I need more coffee. So the term passphrase is really about creating some sort of sentence, creating some sort of lengthy phrase that you can utilize as a password for your access into a site, right? So if you, and I have this sort of mind hack that I share with people, that if you can create a phrase associated with the site, it'll help you with memorizing it. Now, the best practice today is to get a password manager. There are a number of different password managers out there. You know, if you're an Apple user, Apple has the built-in password manager. If you're not an Apple, if you use Chrome, Chrome has a built-in password manager. But if you use a bunch of different devices, right? So at one point, you know, I had all MacBooks and Apple devices and iPads, but I had an Android phone, and I had a Windows computer. And so because that was the ecosystem that I operated in for a long time, I got a password manager probably close to 10 years ago. And what that password manager enabled me to do was have my passwords stored in this password management tool, and I was able to access them ubiquitously across every device that I own by simply installing that password manager. And so the beauty of the password manager is it helps you create better passwords, right? Because it'll create long secure passwords for you. But it'll also store them so you don't have to memorize them. My girlfriend, it was funny the other day, I wish I had told this story earlier. The other day we were going through and I was helping her set something up, and I asked her for a password, and she went and pulled out this Excel spreadsheet with all of these passwords in it. I'm like, I literally had to say to her, I'm like, is this 2001? What are we doing? And so it's easy to just utilize something like that because that's what we've always done. But as we move forward, right, if you think about that one Excel sheet, if someone gets on your computer, that one Excel sheet, now someone's got the passwords to everything that you own. The beauty of these password databases is even if someone were to hack into the password management company's infrastructure, these databases are encrypted, right? So they can't even access them. So I use them. I think they're important, and I would recommend adoption of them. But until you can get to that point, passphrase, right? Other piece is never use the same password twice. And the reason is this. So for those who have LinkedIn accounts, for those who Home Depot, for those who had Yahoo email accounts, all of those entities have had the usernames and passwords stolen at some point or another, right? And so what happens is when usernames and passwords are stolen, they get put into databases out on the dark web. And those databases then are sold. And they're sold because attackers want to buy that information so that they can then try those password and username combinations in other places. So I'll give you an example. If the username and password that you have on LinkedIn, if you utilize that same password on your bank account, right? But maybe you have a username, right? Instead of utilizing the email address. Well, how hard would it be to guess? Because a lot of people's usernames are a combination somehow of their first and last name. So it could be first initial and last name, or last name, first initial, right? If they were to try that with the same password, would they have gotten into your bank account? It's highly likely for a number of people. So the reutilization of passwords is ever so critical to not do. It is one of the biggest things you can do to mitigate risk of your accounts being compromised. The second piece is multi-factor authentication. So adding two-factor authentication where you're getting a text, you're utilizing an authenticator app or something that becomes a second factor of what you have, right? Because if you get a text or a phone call, that means you have your phone. And so somebody's got to both know your username, know your password, and then have your phone. And so it helps to mitigate the risk considerably of any of your accounts potentially being compromised or impacted. Next is educating your users, right? So when we say educating your users, right, it's helping them to understand. So I talked about passwords, right? There's other things just about proper use of a computer, helping them to understand that going to hate sites, going to pornography, going to different things that put you at more risk are not good things to do from the standpoint of utilizing your business technology, right? Those sites, right? Any nefarious site that you can think of are built in a manner where attackers utilize them because there's a lot of click bots and a lot of things that they put in place in an effort to try and compromise people's computers as they go to them. So it's important to educate your employees on the do's and don'ts of how they should and shouldn't use your computers, how to create strong passwords and things of that nature. But then you must also have policies to reinforce it, right? So I work for a company called CyberClan. I'm the chief technology officer of CyberClan. We are 137 people. And even with just 137 people, it's the smallest company I've ever worked for in my life, besides my own consulting company. And we have policies. And because I have staff across the globe, and I need to ensure that I've got a policy that they're aware of on how to utilize the technology that we give them so that they are not putting the company and our data and our systems at risk unnecessarily. Here's another one, and this one impacts small business a lot. And I say that because in small businesses, we tend to be more, I'll say, cohesive and family oriented, right? So when you're in a big company, right, big companies tend to be a little bit more segmented, right? You don't necessarily aren't super close with your the person you're sitting next door in an office to or in a cubicle next to. But in a small company, you've got a 10-person office, right? You know, the likelihood that you know all of them intimately and you know their children and you know all that means you're probably much more comfortable leaving your purse and leaving your wallet and leaving corporate papers and documents out, right? Well, here's the reality. For those shows and those different things that you've seen where someone, you know, maintenance worker, you know, shows a fake badge and gets into the building, right? The whole MacGyver thing, right? Those things are actually real. Those things actually happen where someone pretends to be a janitor, someone pretends to be a maintenance worker, someone pretends to be, right, an inspector doing inspections of the elevator. Those things happen because data and being able to get different things is important. And I'll give you an example. So I happened to go into a doctor's office. This is just before the pandemic last year with one of my children. And when I went into the doctor's office, they were checking someone into my left at the counter, but on the counter, there was a lot of paper sitting there. Now, me being in the field I'm in, I tend to be very observant, right? And I know the social security numbers with names, with credit cards, and all of this data that theoretically, if I was someone that wanted to do something bad or had nefarious intentions, I could have easily grabbed a piece of one of those papers, took a picture with my phone because a lot of people always have their phones out anyway, and had that information and had everybody who was on those top sheets very critical information, right? And use that for, you know, whatever I so chose. Having paper laying around is just a bad practice. So it's good to educate your employees and teach them a practice of putting the paper away, securing the paper, and ensuring that it's not visible to the naked eye or the random passerby. The next piece is locking your computer, right? And I'm sure if I were in, you guys were in the audience in front of me and I asked you to raise your hand if you don't lock your computer when you walk away from it, the majority of you would. The last time I was physically in front of an audience and I asked that question, 80% of the room raised their hand and said, yeah, they just walk away and don't lock their computers. Now, the reality for that is when you're at home, it's probably not as big a deal, right? I mean, it's still a deal because if your child would have come over, and get onto your computer and go to, a nefarious website that causes your computer to get hacked, that would be a bit of a problem. But it may not be as huge a deal, but it's still a practice. But when you're in the office, it's definitely a practice that you should do. And I'll give you an example. When I was in corporate America and I was the chief information security officer and chief security officer of big global companies, I had a practice of walking around, and when I saw a computer unlocked, it took me less than 5 seconds to sit down at somebody's desk, send an email from their email account to me and to the president and CEO of the company. And I would say weird things, right? I hate today. I wish it were Friday, right? I would just do different little things. Now, the interesting thing that I found out over time was no one checks their sent items. I guarantee if I ask you to raise your hands right now and ask who's checked their sent items to see if any mail went out that they didn't send out, and everyone here would raise their hand and say, nope, we didn't, because it's not something you do. It's not a practice that is practical to do, right? But I can tell you, again, back to how quickly things can happen. It took me less than 5 seconds to sit down, do it, and walk away. So think if you've got a spreadsheet open on your computer that's got a bunch of proprietary things to your business, right? How quickly I can sit down and send that out to myself. If you've got a spreadsheet open or a document open of a contract that you're bidding on, if you've got something sitting there open, right, that has got to do with the financial viability of your company, my ability to sit down and edit it, my ability to sit down and send it, my ability to sit down and share it without you ever knowing that quickly. So locking your computer is ever, ever, ever so important. This is another topic that I like to bring up. So cyber liability insurance. A lot of companies, small businesses, don't realize that this is something that they can actually do. For those who are aware of it, most of the time they think that it's only for big companies, and it's not anymore. Cyber liability insurance has gotten to a point where they have programs and policies in place of which you can use in the small business world. But to be clear, it is not a get out of jail free card. It is not all right, well, I've got cyber liability insurance. I'm gonna throw all the stuff Larry just said I don't have to worry about, because if something happens, I've got insurance for it. That's not the way it works. Because similarly, just because you have car insurance, you don't not wear seatbelts, right? Similarly, because you have car insurance, you don't drive 100 miles an hour or run through stoplights or run through stop signs, right? Because you know that there are certain things that you should do as an individual, right? Because your insurance company is going to ask you certain things. And if you have not done your due diligence and you have not followed the laws and followed the rules, then the reality is that they likely may not cover the event. They likely may only cover a portion of the event, right? So having cyber liability insurance is a great risk mitigator from a monetary standpoint to help offset the cost associated with dealing with a breach. But it's important that you have some aspect of cyber hygiene. So what is due diligence, right? Due diligence is literally just doing some basic things right. It's not saying that you have to have a great cybersecurity program in place and have put all these tools in place. It's not saying that. It's saying just do some basic things well. And if you're doing some basic things well, then maybe, right, then maybe, you reduce your risk enough where you don't have to have a breach. But in the event you have one, when your cyber liability provider comes in, they're going to say, oh, right, well, you were doing things that you can, right? So I'll give you an example. I wish I'd shared this one earlier as well. Well, there was a 2-physician practice, neurothoracic heart surgeons out of Arizona. And so they had a cyber breach. Now in the healthcare space, they have government organizations that sort of dictate what you must do, right? And so when they had the first breach via email, it was identified that they were utilizing Gmail to send patient information and to operate their business. And they were told either stop using Gmail or you need to implement a secure email capability, right? Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. So a year later, we had another incident. Auditors came back in. Now remember, this is a 2-doctor practice. Auditors came back in after them having the second incident. They charged them, fined them $10 million for 2 doctors. $10 million, right? So if you think about that, right, and how that would apply to your business, maybe you don't have regulators, right? Maybe you don't have a regulator that's going to come in and fine you from a regulatory standpoint. But let's say that you've got cyber liability in place, but you don't take any precautions, you don't do anything, and you get a ransomware case where someone hits you with a phishing email, and then you have ransomware that spreads throughout the computers in your office. And then they ask, hey, we need you to pay us $3 million, right? If you want us to give you the key to unlock the ransomware so you can get your systems back, right? What would that do to your business? How would that impact you? I guarantee it wouldn't be fun. My company, we have an incident response business unit, and we do 45 to 60 incidents per month across the UK, Canada, and the United States. And I can tell you, those customers are not happy because it's not a fun event. So, with all of this, a couple of things to understand. So, some of you may have technology providers, right? So you may have a managed service provider that is providing you some aspect of technology service and capability. Another thing to make sure that you're doing is understand how they are protecting your systems and your information. Make sure that they have backups. If you don't have a technology provider and you are doing this yourself, and you've got a server in a closet, make sure you have backups. Test restores. Make sure that on at least once a year, you are testing, restoring from those backups. I'll give you another scenario. So a healthcare office, one of our customers, every day, every week, around 3 p.m. on a certain day, they would have technology issues and their systems were going out. And they couldn't figure out why. They couldn't figure out why, what was going on. Always within a few hours of each other, within a few hours of the same time every week. Come to find out through investigation, it was the maid was coming in, and in order to plug up her vacuum, she needed a plug, and the plug was full. So she would unplug the server, do the vacuum that she needed to do, and then plug the server back up. No one was paying attention. No one even thought about it. These little things are all risk to your organization. Remember, I talked about that person coming in, right? That person acting as if they are part of the cleaning service, acting as if they are elevator maintenance, right? Being resilient and having all of these things in place is important for large businesses and small businesses alike. You cannot run a small business and think that you are not prone or susceptible to threats and risk when you utilize technology. You just can't. The other piece is practice. And so when I say practice, so we talked about policies, we talked about, right, have some procedures, go through these things, right? We talked about education. Education isn't just a one-time thing. It's not saying, okay, hey, everybody, make sure you use strong passwords and make sure you aren't going to bad sites and hey, thanks, right? No, it's repeating these things. It's saying them over and over, right? It's walking around the office to see if anybody's left paper out. It's walking around the office to see if anybody has left their computer unlocked. And it's drilling these things in on a regular basis, maybe once a quarter, right? At least once a year, but best practice is once a quarter to be going through and having these types of dialogues with your staff. And the reason that's important is because we all know if anything that you want to do well and be an expert at, the rule of thumb is 10,000 hours, right? And repetition. Like from my standpoint, I like to play golf. I've been playing golf since '94 when I went into the military. I was told as a military officer, you got to learn how to play golf. So I learned how to play. Great. And I enjoyed it. And now I'm a former basketball player, but I loved golf because it wasn't about athletic prowess and how tall you are, how strong you are, any of that. That was great. However, the number of times that I was able to play golf and practice was not what, I would have liked it to be. So I went out and played golf, last week, 2 weeks ago, for the first time in a long time, in many, many years. And because I hadn't practiced, you can imagine how bad my golf swing was. That applies here too, right? Employees, and it relates to their use of technology, their understanding of technology, their use of data, repetition, drilling it in, right? Repetition, continuing to ensure that they get it. It takes time, and you must practice. So with that, here's some takeaways, right? So, and this is in no particular order. All these things are important. So educate and train your users. Use strong passwords, as in passphrases. Get a password manager. Again, I use LastPass. I love LastPass. I've used it for almost a decade. It's a great, great tool, and it's free. I paid for the professional version, which gives you more capability, but just for basic use, the free version gives you everything that you need. Don't install unnecessary software, right? Your computer systems are to do business. And on occasion, you definitely want to be flexible with employees in small business environments to enable them to do things that they need to do, like if they're doing continuing education, right? But they don't need to install games, right? The gaming industry is one of the biggest ways that attacks happen. So be aware, set a policy in place, and drill it in to not install unnecessary software, because the more unnecessary software you install, the larger risk you have of having some sort of breach, because software gets breached on a regular basis. Social media is dangerous. So I talked about, the OSINT, open source intelligence, right? So social media is a lot of times where not only are they gathering information, but how people, what people are using to connect and contact people. I can't tell you how many times via Facebook and Facebook Messenger, I've had one of my contacts in Facebook where I get a link that says, hey, here's a picture of you. Tell me what you think, right? And now, I don't click the link because I know better. And then a week later or 2 weeks later, right, get a message from them, hey, my Facebook account was hacked. Don't click any links you get from me. Well, the reality is, if I weren't a cybersecurity professional, right, I would have clicked that link 2 weeks ago. Have a backup of your data. Right? Again, whether you are doing this yourself and you've got a server sitting in a closet, right? Or you've got a managed service provider providing these services for you, have a backup of your data. And at least once a year, test recovery, test going through a backup, test to ensure that backups are working, because you do not want to get to a stage where you have a security incident and then you go to try and recover from the tape backups or whatever type of backup that you have, and you can't because you never tested it and it doesn't work. It can be crucial to your business. Today, consumers are at more risk than ever because attackers finally realized monetarily, and from so let me put it like this: attackers are running businesses, right? They are literally running businesses. They've got profit and loss. They're looking at level of effort, right, and all those types of things. So if you think about a level of effort, for them to compromise a JP Morgan Chase or a large corporate entity is a 9 to 12 to possibly 18 months endeavor. Versus, right, and so let's think versus a small company. So if a small company, they can compromise in 3 days, right? Which one are they going to go after? Well, what people have said to me, well, but you're going to get more money from JP Morgan Chase, right? So that's the response to that. And I say, you're absolutely right. So if I go to JP Morgan Chase, I'm trying to get 500,000 or 5 million, right? $5 million. Let's say I want $5 million. Okay. So if it takes me 12 months to compromise JP Morgan Chase, and I ask for $5 million as part of that compromise, the likelihood that JP Morgan Chase is going to pay that out is extremely small because they've got cyber liability insurance, one. Number two, they've got over 2,500 employees just in cybersecurity alone. So for them, their ability to recover and basically mitigate the risk associated with what the breach was is far greater than what a small business is. Whereas a small business, if I come to a small business as an attacker and I attack you and it takes me 2 days, right? But I only asked for $5,000, right? Me asking a small business for $5,000, maybe it's a drop in the bucket for them. But if they don't pay it to me and I cripple their business because of what I have, it's far more impactful because a small business doesn't have the resources to combat the threat. So now if I do that to 1,000 small businesses at $5,000 each, guess what just happened? I just made that $1 million without the same level of effort, right? And so it's important to understand small businesses are at risk. And on many fronts, it's a greater risk than the larger companies because one breach could potentially put you out of business. Keep your technology up to date. If you are managing your own technology, if you got your own IT department or don't have an IT department at all, everything needs to be set to auto update. Windows, all of the software, Chrome, everything that you utilize on your laptop should be set to auto update. If you've got an IT service provider, you should be working with them to figure out what is the patch management strategy to ensure that you are as up to date as possible, as quickly as possible, right? Because that's another thing that attackers utilize is when they send you a phishing email, if you click on a link, sometimes they're going to try and do things to lure you to a website or have you download something that tries to take advantage of vulnerabilities inside your system. Another piece is the cloud is your friend, right? So for small businesses, utilizing cloud-based services, right, where you're not installing things locally, you're not having to run your own servers, and enabling these cloud-based service providers to maintain the data for you, there's economies to scale there. And the security controls and things that they put in place in their environments is far greater than anything you're going to be able to implement yourself and on your own as it relates to protecting what I would consider your crown jewels. If possible, have monitoring of your environment. My organization, CyberClan, we do 24/7 monitoring of customers. And we do that because, you go to sleep, your staff goes to sleep, but attackers don't sleep. Attackers are up 24/7, 7 days a week, right? They're up round the clock, always trying to find ways to make money. And it's not that one individual, but remember, these are businesses. So they've got 24/7 staff, right? I'll give you an example. During the holidays, right, in the U.S., the last 2 weeks of the year are pretty much dead. Literally, pretty much everybody is going on vacation or winding down and taking time off, right? And so the diligence that we have during that time of the year is definitely dwindled considerably. Attackers know that. Our busiest time of the year, a lot of times, as it relates to incidents, because we do 45 to 60 incidents per month around the globe, is that time of year, right? That time of year, it goes way above 60 because attackers know, right, that people's guards are down, right? But big companies, most of the time, they have 24/7 monitoring in place, so their guards aren't down, but it's small businesses whose guards are down. But the funny thing is, the end of January and February, things get light from an incident standpoint because attackers take vacation too. Even though they don't sleep, they do take vacation. The last piece is understanding that, good cybersecurity is a never-ending journey because the threats that exist today are going to evolve and change tomorrow. There are going to be new things that come in that we have never seen before. It's a constant evolving industry because attackers have the ability to think outside the box. They have the ability to try and make things do stuff that the person who built it or the people or the team who built it never thought about. They never considered making that software try and do these things. But that's what attackers do. Their goal is to try and utilize things that we use every day to make it do something it shouldn't do so that they can take advantage of a weakness. And so don't ever think that you've done enough. Don't ever think that you're done exploring things to do from a cybersecurity standpoint. That's all I have. This is my contact information. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out via LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm a pretty public guy as it relates to the OSINT, open source intelligence stuff that I put out there. I pretty much put everything out there, but I also have a lot of controls in place to try and mitigate the risk associated with it. So thank you. I appreciate you all jumping in and listening to me.
Thank you, Larry. We do have a few questions that came in the chat and came to me. So one of the questions that came in, when you host a website on a place like GoDaddy, what level of security do they provide for the website that you host their site on? You have information on that?
I do. So web hosting sites do have a responsibility to protect your site to a point. So it depends on how complex your site is. So if your site has a lot of complexity, there's a lot of data points that are being put in the site where people are entering data, you've got to look at the fine line on what you pay, because they have tiered models of how much you pay, right? Some people just have a static site. It's got some words on it. It never changes. And so it's not as big a deal. And so they will protect that right at a basic level. But once you start doing things like e-commerce and you start adding fields and accepting data, then there's another level of security that they should be putting, but you typically have to pay for it. And if you did not read it, you need to check and see what level of security they are offering you, because they have different levels.
Thank you for that. Another question I received is, have you ever been put in a situation, hopefully not recently, but before when you were just getting into the industry, have you ever been put in a situation where your information was compromised, and how did you respond to that?
So I've had my password compromised, right? So in years ago, so when I can't remember what site it was breached. So there's a website called Have You Been Pwned, right? So Have You Been Pwned, you can go and check and see. So what happened to me was similar to what I was talking about. I had a password that I was using in multiple places, but I was using it for some basic things, right? So job sites and just very basic generic things. Well, that password ended up being compromised. Well, what I didn't realize was I was also using that password for my Yahoo account. Now, the Yahoo account, I'd never really went into it. It was just an account I had set up. I used it for fantasy football. And so it wasn't until I went to the account that I realized, wait, like, what is this? Somebody had gone in there and changed certain information and all sorts of stuff. So that's when I realized that, using the password, even a basic password multiple times is just not, and I had to determine what's critical and what's not. And, if you're a fantasy football player, your fantasy football account is pretty critical and important. So I had to move that one up my list of things to deal with. But I've never had a real takeover of any of my information. I've never had my identity stolen. Thank God. I'm gonna knock on some wood somewhere, right? But I know people who have. I know people who've dealt with it. It is not an easy thing to get through. I know many businesses. I've dealt with many businesses. A number of my customers today have been through breaches where they have had an attacker implement malware in their environment, and 90% of the time it's come through email. Right, 90% of the time it's coming through email, where they have some sort of phishing email or something that someone clicks on, and one of two things happens. Either they click on it, it downloads something to their computer, and then begins spreading ransomware, across the company. Or I've had one organization where I was the head of security, and when I came on board, we had people put their credentials out there from a phishing email, put their email address and the password, and then the attacker started coming in through our web-based email system because we didn't have two-factor authentication in place. And we ended up getting put on a block list because we were spamming companies. So we couldn't send emails out. And can you imagine what that would do to your business if you couldn't send emails anywhere, right? So these things are real. It's a scary world, but for me, there's a lot of job security in it.
Got you. Thank you for that. We have about 6 minutes left, so I'll take a few more questions. Make sure you're sending those questions in the chat if you have them. Another question that was asked is they currently use Outlook for their communications provider, but they also use Gmail. Is there any difference in the level of security between the two? Is one more secure than the other?
No, not really, right? When it comes to I want to be clear. When you say Outlook, I'm assuming you're saying Outlook as an application on your computer, but it's Gmail as the back end, right? So utilizing Outlook on your computer, but that being your Gmail account feeding into it is nothing. It's just using a different application versus Gmail's web-based application. So it's not adding anything. I'll tell you, I use Outlook because I hate Gmail's web interface. I can't operate within it. It's very bad to me personally. I know some people who love it and can use it. I cannot. But you're not going to get any more security by utilizing Outlook versus Gmail's web interface.
Thank you for that. A question that I had, so for small business owners, obviously, depending on the size of the business, their budget for to handle the security side, cybersecurity side differs from a larger corporation. So do you have any either recommendations of either software or something that smaller business owners may be able to, not more so afford, but be able to keep within their budget compared to a larger company that can handle, having an IT team and all of this extra stuff?
Yep. There's a lot of software out there, right? And the reality is the difference between the small company and the large company is a couple of things. One, it's the plethora of software that you're going to use. So in a small company, you're not going to have the different layers that the larger company is going to have. The larger companies are going to have firewalls, and they're going to have things in front of their web servers, and then they're going to have things on their network, and they're going to have all of those different things. For a smaller company, right, it's important to focus on the endpoint itself, right, the thing that the user is using. So most are probably using laptops today. So it's important to focus on those. And so there are a number of different tools and technologies that you use that you can use. SentinelOne is a great one. CrowdStrike is another great one. And the beauty of them is these same technologies are used in corporate America, but what they've done is they've created a mechanism and a pricing model that enables small businesses to take advantage of them. So for us, in the few hundred clients that we have, they're all utilizing one of these, right? We sell these technologies. We also sell monitoring services because we want to make sure that we're helping them in the event that they have a breach, being able to isolate the threat so that it's not impacting their organization more largely.
Got you. Thank you for that. And I don't see any more questions at the moment. We are just a few minutes early. Let me see. Anyone has any additional questions, now would be the time to put them in the chat. And let's see, maybe I'll just try to come up with a couple. So Larry, let me go back to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I just saw a question come in from Bishop Tolbert. So it is really, those monitoring services can be structured whatever's comfortable for the customer, right? So it's a 24/7 monitoring service that gets put in place to ensure that, in the event that something happens during the nighttime when everybody's asleep, right, which happens a lot, there is somebody that responds to it and can isolate it. That's the big thing today. These technologies that you can put on your laptops and your servers today have the ability to enable you to isolate it where it's not impacting anything else. In the past, once it got on one device, unless you unplug that device physically from the network or from the wireless, it was automatically going to hit everything else. And so today's environment enables you the capability, if you've got the right tool in place, and it's called an EDR tool. If you have one of those in place, you can isolate it directly on the device that was impacted. So it's all the rage, I should say. Every company has some form of it at this point in the corporate world. Small companies are now starting to deploy it. We've got a lot of customers. Right now, we average between 45 and 60 incident cases per month across the globe that we're responding to between the UK, Canada, and the United States. And that's just us, a small 137 person company, right? So you can imagine how many are actually probably happening.
Thank you for that. Someone had asked the software that you had mentioned when I asked the question about the small businesses. Could you name that again? I'll try to type it in the chat. This is also being recorded, so it will be available to view again.
I'll type it in the chat right now.
Okay.
Sentinel-1 is one, and CrowdStrike is the other. There are others that are out there, but these are the two top market leaders, right? So they're the best at what they do. They're really good. I know both of the founders. Really good technology, really good guys, really good companies.
All right, got you. I've sent that to everyone in the chat. And any last minute questions? We have just a couple of more minutes. If we don't have any more questions, I'll go ahead and end the session, but I just want to make sure I answer get everyone's question answered. And it looks like, I see a thank you. Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions at this moment. So thank you, Larry, for taking the time to share this with our MBEs. I'm positive this valuable information will be applied to create stronger companies whose systems are more secure thanks to you. So we appreciate you very much. We are at the top of the hour, so it is just at 11:55 Central Standard Time. So we're going to take another short break. You can go out, stretch your legs, get something to eat, a small little snack. Try to be back within the next 10 minutes. The next MBE workshop will begin at 10 minutes past the hour, and you will be automatically relocated to the pre-assigned MBE workshop. So enjoy your break, and we will see you at 10 minutes past the hour. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.